The fog came in low that morning. It rolled across the cornfields in slow sheets, thin enough that you could see the stalks bending in the distance but thick enough to swallow the spaces between them. The sun hadn't fully cleared the tree line. The light was the color of old glass, pale, diffused, without warmth. The cemetery sat at the edge of the Callaway farm, separated from the nearest road by a quarter-mile of gravel path and a rusted iron gate that no longer closed properly. It wasn't a public cemetery. It never had been. 6 generations of a family buried in the same soft earth, marked by stones that leaned at different angles depending on how many winters they'd survived. The newest stone was clean limestone. No moss yet. The letters still sharp. Diane Eleanor Foster, beloved mother. 2 children knelt in front of it. They were identical, in the way that made strangers do a double take. Same sandy hair, same narrow shoulders, same posture of absolute stillness. 7 years old, maybe, hard to tell exactly at a distance. A boy and a girl, both in rubber boots that were slightly too large. Both with their hands folded in their laps, the way no one had taught them but they'd figured out on their own. They weren't praying in any formal sense. There were no rosary beads, no open books. They just talked quietly to the stone. The way children talk to things that can't answer, without embarrassment and without expectation. The girl did most of the talking. The boy sat with his shoulder pressed against hers and stared at the carved letters like he was trying to memorize them. "We made eggs this morning," the girl said. Noah burned his a little, but he didn't say anything. Noah, the boy, didn't correct her. "I told him it was fine." It was fine. A bird passed overhead. Neither child looked up. 300 yards to the north, along the far fence line where the Callaway property met the county road, a man was working on a fence post that had shifted after the spring thaw. His name was Carter Briggs, 34 years old, wide through the shoulders, the kind of build that came from actual work rather than a gym. He had on a canvas jacket that had been washed enough times to lose its original color and work gloves with the index finger cut out on the right hand. He'd done that himself with a pair of scissors 2 winters ago. It made it easier to feel the wire. He worked quietly. He was good at quiet. He'd bought the farmhouse 8 months ago. The one that backed up against the Callaway land, not because he'd particularly wanted a farmhouse, or because he knew anything about farming, but because it was the right price, and because it had enough space for a child to grow up in without it, and because the nearest neighbor was far enough away that you could have a bad night without anyone noticing. His daughter, Molly, was at school. He was almost always alone when she wasn't there. He noticed the 2 children the way he noticed everything at a distance, first as shapes, as data. 2 small figures at the old Foster plot. He'd seen them before, once, maybe 6 weeks ago, from even farther away. He'd thought they were with someone that time. He looked around now and saw no car. No adult waiting by the gate. No figure standing back to give them privacy. He went back to the fence post. He drove the brace stake another 2 inches with the mallet, checked the tension on the wire, and looked up again. They were still there, still kneeling, still talking to a stone. He put the mallet down on the grass and picked up a pair of wire cutters and kept working. But he moved slightly, shifted his angle, so that the cemetery was in his peripheral vision rather than directly behind him. This was not something he thought about consciously. It was the kind of adjustment a person makes when something is not quite wrong but not quite right either. The body deciding before the mind. The fog thinned a little as the morning aged. The light turned from pale glass to something almost yellow. A truck passed on the county road in the distance, moving fast, not slowing. The girl said something to the stone that Carter couldn't hear. The boy had picked up a small, smooth pebble from the ground and was holding it in his closed fist. Everything was still, and then a car turned off the county road onto the gravel path. The car was a dark blue sedan, older. One of those models that had been everywhere in the mid-90s and now looked out of place among newer vehicles. It moved without hurry. That was the first thing Carter noticed. Not slow the way someone unfamiliar with a gravel road goes slow. Slow the way someone goes slow when they already know exactly where they're going and they're in no rush to arrive because arriving is not the problem. The car stopped 40 yards from the cemetery gate. The engine cut. A man got out. He was in his late 40s, heavy through the middle, with close-cropped gray hair and a dark coat that was too warm for the season. He had on dark trousers and boots that were not work boots. He didn't look at the cornfields. He didn't look at the sky. He walked toward the gate, with his eyes fixed on the two children the entire time. Carter set the wire cutters on the fence post. The man pushed through the gate. It swung easily, the rusted latch giving without resistance, and walked toward the children. He moved through the rows of older stones without looking at them, which meant he knew the layout. He stopped about 10 feet behind the two children, who hadn't heard him yet, and stood there for a moment. Then he said a name. Carter was too far to hear which name, but one of the children. The boy turned around, and the boy's body language changed immediately. Every bit of relaxed ease that had been in his posture a moment before contracted into something rigid and uncertain. The girl turned around a second later. Neither child stood up. The man crouched down to their level and spoke for perhaps 15 seconds. Carter watched. He could not read lips at this distance. He could only read posture, and the children's posture was the posture of children who have been told something they don't understand by an adult they are not sure they should trust. Not fear. Not yet. Something closer to the silence before a question gets asked. Then the man stood up and reached down and took the boy's hand. Not offered, taken. He began walking toward the gate. The boy was moving with him, but not moving on his own. There is a difference. It is visible even from 300 yards between a child who is walking and a child who is being walked. The boy's feet were moving, but his body was leaning backward, almost imperceptibly. The resistance of a child who does not want to go somewhere but has not yet decided to resist out loud. The girl stayed on her knees by the stone. She watched her brother being led away. She put both hands flat on the ground in front of her and said nothing. Carter Briggs did not run. He picked up his canvas jacket from the fence post. He put the wire cutters in his jacket pocket. He stepped through the gap in the fence where the post had shifted, and he crossed the field toward the cemetery, at an angle not directly toward the gate but toward the far corner of the fence line, where a row of old elm trees ran parallel to the gravel path. He moved quickly but without the look of someone moving quickly. He had spent 11 years in a profession that had required him to learn the difference. Running draws attention, moving with purpose, at the right angle, through terrain that conceals your approach, does not. He used the elm trees. He used the tall grass along the drainage ditch. He kept his eyes on the man the whole time, and the man did not look back. The boy said something. Small voice. Faint. Carter couldn't hear it. The man didn't respond. He kept walking. 40 feet from the gate. 30. The car was visible now from Carter's angle. The driver's side door still hanging open the way it had been left when the man got out. Carter was moving through the drainage ditch now. Low. His boots sinking slightly in the soft ground. 20 feet from the gate. 15. The man reached for the car door. Carter came over the fence. There are things that the body knows before the mind confirms them. Carter Briggs had been many things in his life, and most of them he had left behind in the deliberate and unglamorous way that a person leaves behind a version of themselves, not dramatically, not with a clean break, but slowly, through repetition and choice, and the accumulation of small mornings that looked different from the ones before. He had become a man who fixed fences and made his daughter's lunch and went to bed before 10 o'clock. But the body remembers. He came over the fence at the corner post, landed quietly, and covered the last 12 feet to the car in the time it took the man to turn and register that there was someone behind him. The boy was between them, the man's hand still wrapped around his wrist. Carter's voice was very quiet. Let go of his hand. Not a shout, not a command with volume, just words placed in the air between them with absolute certainty. The man turned. His eyes moved over Carter. Assessment. Rapid. The kind of look that is looking for a threat level. He found something in Carter's face that made him recalculate. Whatever he'd expected, it wasn't this. I know this family, the man said. These are my sister's kids. Let go of his hand, Carter said again. Same volume, same words. He hadn't moved closer. He didn't need to. Not yet. The man's grip on the boy's wrist loosened not out of compliance, Carter thought. but out of the instinct to seem cooperative while buying time. The boy stepped sideways. Carter's hand went to the boy's shoulder, and the boy was behind him in one motion, smooth, like water going around a stone. The man stood in front of the open car door. "You have no idea what's going on here," he said. His voice had taken on a different quality, calmer, reasoning. The voice of a man accustomed to talking his way through difficult situations. "These children have a family. You're interfering in a private family matter." "Then we'll wait for the police to sort it out," Carter said. He'd already taken his phone out of his jacket pocket. He made the call without looking down at the screen. When the dispatcher answered, he gave his name and the location in a single sentence and said that a man had attempted to remove a child from a rural cemetery against the child's will, and that the man was still on scene. He kept his eyes on the man the entire time. The man watched him make the call. Then the man made a decision. He moved fast for his size. Carter gave him that. He lunged forward and grabbed for the boy. And Carter's response was not a punch, not a shove, but a pivot and a lock, his right arm coming under the man's reaching arm, his body turning into the man's momentum, redirecting it so that the man's weight carried him past rather than through. The man stumbled against the fence post. Carter was already putting distance between the man and the boy, backing up, keeping the boy behind him. The man straightened. He looked at Carter. He looked at the car. He got in and drove. Gravel scattered. The dark blue sedan moved too fast down the narrow path and turned hard onto the county road, heading west. Carter watched it go. He noted the plate number, or as much of it as he could read through the dust. He heard the girl running. She came through the gate at a sprint, her rubber boots too large and slapping against the gravel, and she grabbed her brother's arm, and they stood against each other and shook, both of them, without making a sound. Not crying. Something past crying. The silent version that happens when the body doesn't know what else to do with itself. Carter crouched down to their level. He didn't touch them. He said, "You're okay." He said it once. He didn't say it again. The girl's name was Lily. The boy's name was Noah. Carter learned these things gradually. The way you learn things from frightened children, not by asking directly, but by listening to the spaces where information appears on its own. He walked them to his truck, which was parked at the far end of the fence line, and he let them get in the passenger side without asking if they wanted to. They wanted to. He could see it. The open field felt dangerous now in a way it hadn't 30 minutes ago. He gave them water from the bottle he kept on the seat. He didn't ask them what had happened. He didn't ask who the man was. He turned the heat on. It was not cold enough for the heat. Not really, but they were shaking, and heat made people feel contained. He left the doors open. He sat sideways in the driver's seat, with his feet on the running board, and waited. Lily spoke first. "He knew our names," she said. Her voice was very flat, the way a child's voice gets when they are reporting something they don't fully understand. "He said ours." Not just he said Noah first. "My name too." Carter nodded. "Has he come before?" She thought about it seriously. "Once. He was at the house. He talked to someone. Not us. We were in the other room." "What house?" "Grandma Patrice's house." She looked at her brother. "After Mom died, we went there. For a while." Noah hadn't said anything since the man had left. He was holding the water bottle with both hands and staring at the dashboard. Carter watched him, without making it obvious. "Where are you staying now?" Carter asked. "Mrs. Calloway lets us stay in the house." Lily pointed in the direction of the main farmhouse, which was visible from the truck white clapboard, a wide porch, a satellite dish that had shifted on the roof, and now pointed vaguely sideways. "She knew our mom. She said we could stay until things get sorted." "What things?" Lily shrugged the way 7-year-olds shrug when they are quoting something an adult said that they didn't entirely understand. "Legal things." Noah finally spoke. His voice was rough. "He said he was taking me to see Dad." Carter looked at him. "Your dad is gone," Noah said. Not gone the way he'd said it about his mother. Gone, differently. Carter registered the difference and didn't press it. He called the police again and told them the children were safe and that he was with them. The dispatcher told him a unit was on its way. He told her the suspect had driven west on the county road in a dark blue sedan, older model, and read out the partial plate number. She thanked him and said to stay put. He stayed put. He let the children finish the water, and he watched the corn in the distance bend and straighten in a slow wind, and he thought about the way the man had crouched down to the children's level before taking Noah's hand. That was not the body language of someone who was uncertain. That was the body language of someone following a plan. The patrol car arrived in 17 minutes. The deputy was a young woman named Greta Hollins, efficient and direct, with a notepad that she filled in careful block letters. She took Carter's statement first, then spoke to the children separately, crouching at their level the same way Carter had. She was good with them. Carter noticed this. She didn't push. She asked simple questions and wrote down the answers without showing her reactions. When she came back to Carter, her expression was professionally neutral. "Children confirm the account," she said. Man identified himself as Owen Marsh. He told the boy he was there on behalf of the family. She paused. "There's an open matter in family court regarding these children. I'm not at liberty to discuss details, but this individual's name may be known to the relevant parties." "May be," Carter said. She met his eyes briefly. "I'll pass the report up. Given the partial plate and direction of travel, we may have something by end of day." He was prepared, Carter said. He knew which child he was taking. He knew their names. He'd planned the approach. Deputy Hollins wrote something in her notepad. "That's consistent with what the girl described. He'll come back." She looked up from the notepad. She didn't answer immediately. "I'd encourage you to make sure Mrs. Calloway knows to keep the children close, and to contact the family court case worker." Carter nodded. He watched the patrol car pull away. Then he walked the children to the farmhouse, which was unlocked, the kind of unlock that came from habit rather than carelessness, the kind that belonged to a time when locking doors in this part of the county hadn't seemed necessary. Agnes Calloway met them at the porch. She was in her late 60s, white-haired, with the kind of face that had been weathered by decades of actual outdoor living rather than recreational sun exposure. She looked at the children, and then at Carter, and her mouth went thin. "I'll get them inside," she said. Carter waited on the porch while she settled them. When she came back out, she stood with her arms crossed and looked at the field. "I should have been with them," she said. "I had a delivery coming. I thought they go every week." "Nothing ever happens." "Nothing had," Carter said, "until today." She was quiet. "You know the name Owen Marsh?" She said it slowly, like she was tasting something unpleasant. "He was connected to their father. Years back. Some kind of business arrangement that didn't end well." She paused. "Their father is not dead. She chose her words carefully. "He's not in a position to be raising children. The court determined that. But there are people who would prefer a different arrangement. People like Marsh. People like whoever hired Marsh," she said. Carter looked at the county road in the distance. The gravel path was empty. The iron gate hung open at the same crooked angle it always had. "He'll come back," Carter said. Agnes Calloway said nothing, but she didn't tell him he was wrong. Carter Briggs had bought the farmhouse on Cedar Creek Road because it was quiet and because his daughter needed to start over somewhere that didn't carry the weight of before. He had been, in a previous life, an investigator for a private firm that worked adjacent to law enforcement without being constrained by it: insurance fraud, corporate surveillance, missing persons, the unglamorous work that existed in the space between what police could do and what clients needed done. He had been good at it. He had also been too good at it for too long, and the work had a way of following a person home, and eventually the thing he'd brought home had cost him his marriage, and nearly his daughter's sense that the world was a stable place to live in. He'd left the firm 3 years ago. He'd moved here 8 months ago. He didn't think of himself as someone with skills anymore. He thought of himself as someone trying to become ordinary. But ordinary people, he had come to understand, are just people who haven't been tested yet. He spent the afternoon working. He finished the fence post. He drove into town and bought groceries. He picked up Molly from school. She was 8. With her mother's eyes and his habit of going quiet when something was wrong, which was both reassuring and difficult. At dinner, she told him about a project on state birds, and he listened seriously and answered her questions, and helped her look up what a loon call sounds like on his phone. After she was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and thought about the dark blue sedan. He thought about the way Marsh had crouched to the children's level before taking Noah's hand. The preparation in it. The familiarity with the location. He'd known which path the car could navigate. He'd known the cemetery gate wasn't locked. He'd known the children's routine. Or enough of it, the right day, the right time, the right place. Someone had given him that information. Carter opened his laptop and spent an hour looking at things that were publicly available: property records, court filings accessible through the county clerk's online portal, business registrations. He was not doing anything illegal. He was doing what he had always done, which was paying attention to what was already visible to anyone who knew where to look. He found 3 references to a man named Gerald Foster in county records. The most recent was a family court filing dated 14 months ago. The children's names were redacted in the public version, as they always were. But the timeline aligned, and Gerald Foster's listed address was a residence in the same city where the children's grandmother Patrice lived, the house where Lily had said the man had appeared once before. Gerald Foster was not dead. He was incarcerated. Carter found the news item in the archives of the regional newspaper: a business fraud conviction 3 years prior, a sentence of 4 to 6 years, minimum security. He was still serving time at a facility less than 90 miles from where Carter was now sitting. The article described Gerald Foster as a former real estate developer, with interests in agricultural land and rural property across several counties. The fraud had involved misrepresentation to investors in a series of development projects that had never delivered what they promised. There were references to creditors, multiple civil suits that had been filed and then quietly settled or abandoned when it became clear there was nothing liquid left to pursue. He sat back. So someone was acting on Gerald Foster's behalf. He thought about the trust Agnes had mentioned, the guardian provision, the creditors who stood to benefit if the trust reverted. This approach, 2 men, a cut lock, a prepared vehicle, was not patience, it was pressure. Someone trying to move something before the formal legal process could stabilize against them. Carter thought about Owen Marsh's face in the moment before he drove away, not frightened, not panicked, just recalculating. The face of a professional who understood failure as information, something to report and receive new instructions about. The question was not whether Marsh would return. The question was what he would return with. He closed the laptop. He went and looked in on Molly, who was asleep with one arm hanging off the side of the bed the way she always slept, her breathing slow and completely trustful of the world in the way that only children who have been kept safe can manage. He stood in her doorway for a long moment. He thought about what it had cost to keep her safe, not in dramatic terms, but in the quiet daily terms of showing up, of being present, of not letting anything make him into someone she needed protection from. He went back to the kitchen. He sat in the dark and thought about 2 children in rubber boots who had learned to pray without being taught, to a stone that couldn't answer. In a cemetery they visited alone because there was no one to bring them. He thought about the gate that didn't close. He thought about the way Noah had held a smooth pebble in his closed fist the entire time he was kneeling beside his mother's grave. Then he called Agnes Calloway. The next morning he walked back to the cemetery. He went early, before the fog lifted, before Agnes Calloway's lights were on in the farmhouse. He brought a coffee and a thermos, and he walked the full perimeter of the cemetery fence before he entered through the gate. Old habit, the kind that had saved him time on more than one occasion, by identifying what was present before focusing on what he'd come to look at. The gravel path showed tire tracks. The sedan had made 2 passes, the arrival and the departure, and the tread marks were deep enough in the soft shoulder to photograph clearly. He took photos on his phone at several angles, close and wide, the way he'd been taught to do before any of the digital tools existed to make it easy. Then he walked the full length of the path toward the county road, moving slowly, looking at the grass verge on both sides. There was a spot in the grass off the shoulder, roughly 20 yards east of the gate, where the ground had been compressed by a vehicle sitting still. Not the sedan, different tread pattern, narrower, a truck or a light SUV. The compression was older, maybe a week, maybe slightly more, depending on the recent rain. Someone had sat here before. Someone had parked here quietly and watched the cemetery from this position for an extended period of time, long enough to leave this kind of impression in soft ground. He measured the sight line with his eyes. From this position, you had a clear view of the gate, the path inside the gate, and the main plot area where the newer stones were located. On a clear morning, early, before the light got direct, you could observe children arriving and count minutes and know exactly how long their routine lasted. This had not been improvised. He took more photographs. He photographed the compression, the approach angle from the road, the sight lines. He documented the distance from the shoulder to the gate. He found what might have been a cigarette end in the grass near the compression point and photographed that as well. He didn't touch any of it. He walked back through the cemetery. The limestone stone Diane Eleanor Foster had a small flat pebble resting on its upper ledge that hadn't been there in the county property records photographs. Noah's pebble, the one he'd been holding in his closed fist when the man arrived. At some point, before or after everything had happened, he had put it there. Carter stood in front of the stone for a moment. He was not a person given to ceremony or extended sentiment, but there was something about the pebble, its specificity, its smallness, the deliberateness of placing it there that required acknowledgement. He stood in front of it and was quiet for a moment, and that was enough. Then he walked to the farmhouse. Agnes Calloway was awake. She'd been awake for a while by the look of her dressed, coffee already made, sitting at the kitchen table, with a stillness that suggested she'd been sitting there thinking for some time before he knocked. She made him a cup without asking, and they sat across from each other while the children still slept upstairs. He showed her the photographs. She looked at them carefully, the way she looked at everything without hurry, without pretending to understand something she didn't. 2 vehicles, she said, at minimum. Marcia's car was the one used for the approach. Someone else did the prior surveillance. Different tires, older compression, different location. He pointed at the image on the screen. This person sat here for a while, long enough to time the children's routine precisely, so there's more than one person involved. Yes, and whoever did the earlier surveillance has not necessarily been identified. Marsh may be the name we know. He may not be the person most worth worrying about. She set the phone carefully on the table. The caseworker is coming Thursday. I was going to wait until then to say anything about yesterday. But, tell them today, Carter said. Call them this morning, and tell them specifically that the approach was planned, that there was prior surveillance, and that, at minimum, 2 individuals were involved. Don't let them treat this as an isolated incident or a spontaneous act. The language is different. An isolated incident gets a different response than a coordinated operation. She looked at him steadily for a moment. You know about this kind of thing. I did. For a while. She didn't ask more than that. She picked up her own phone and made a note. The children's father is serving time, Carter said. Someone is acting on his behalf. It might be about legal custody, trying to establish a living arrangement that would look favorable in an eventual appeal. Or it could be something simpler than that. Money, property. The Fosters had some land. I don't know what's in the estate. Diane left everything to the children, Agnes said quietly. In trust, very simple, very clear. But the trust has a guardian provision. Carter waited. If something happened to the children, if they became wards of the wrong person, the trust reverts to the estate, which has creditors. Gerald's creditors. He sat with that. So this is about money, he said. Everything like this is always about money, Agnes said. Eventually, he told Deputy Hollins what he'd found. He did it carefully, because he understood the limits of civilian initiative and he had no interest in making himself an obstacle in a legal process that needed to move correctly. He presented the photographs. He presented his reasoning about the sightline location and the 2-vehicle pattern. He presented the information about Gerald Foster's incarceration and the trust provision as context, not accusation. Hollins listened without interrupting. She was, Carter thought, someone who was good at her job and frustrated by it in equal measure. The particular frustration of someone who sees clearly. and is constrained by what the system allows her to do with what she sees. I can't act on information gathered by a civilian without corroboration, she said when he was done. But I can flag this to the family court caseworker as additional context, and I can add the sightline location to the incident report and request that the area be included in the next week's patrols. Owen Marsh. We identified him from the partial plate. She paused. He has a prior. Unrelated. He is known to associates of Gerald Foster from before the conviction. Another pause. He was released from custody 6 months ago. 6 months ago, Carter said. Yes. About 2 months before the prior surveillance at the cemetery gate. She looked at him. I can't confirm that connection officially. But yes. He thanked her and left. He drove home and picked up Molly from the school bus and let her do her homework at the kitchen table while he made dinner. She wanted to know about the Statebird project again. He listened. He made pasta with the sauce she liked, the one with the cherry tomatoes. And he let her have a second serving, and they watched half of a movie before bed. After she was asleep, he sat at the table again. He was not afraid of Owen Marsh. That was not the problem. The problem was that Marsh was not the decision-maker, which meant removing Marsh from the equation was not the same as resolving the threat. The problem was that the children were staying in a farmhouse with a 67-year-old woman, a gate that didn't close, and a routine that had already been successfully surveilled. He picked up his phone and called Agnes Calloway. I'd like to come by tomorrow, he said. I can bring some things. A better lock for the gate, a motion sensor for the path. He paused. And I'd like to talk to the children. There was a silence. All right, she said. He talked to the children the way he talked to Molly when something serious had happened directly, without softening it into confusion, but without loading it with weight they couldn't carry yet. He told Lily and Noah that someone might come back. He didn't sugarcoat this or surround it with qualifiers. Children, in his experience, knew when they were being told a partial truth, and partial truths were more frightening than complete ones, because they left space for imagination to fill in what was missing. He told them it would not be the same as before, because now people knew, and knowing changed things. The police knew. The caseworker would know. He knew. Knowing closed the gaps that the other side had been using. He told them what to do if they heard a car on the gravel path at night. He showed them the motion sensor light he was mounting on the corner of the barn, a bright flood type, triggered by movement, connected to an app on his phone that would alert him within seconds. He showed them the new lock on the gate. He showed them how it worked. Let Lily try the key herself. Let Noah test it 3 times to feel the mechanism. Noah watched all of this with great seriousness. Lily asked if he was a police officer. No, he said. What are you then? He thought about it. A neighbor, he said. She considered this for a moment with the measured weight she gave to most things. Okay, she said. And that was that. He stayed through dinner. Agnes made a simple meal, and the children talked more than he expected about their mother, about a cat they'd had at the previous house, about the school they'd be starting in the fall if things were sorted out by then. Lily talked most. Noah listened and occasionally corrected small details with quiet precision, which Lily accepted without argument and without resentment. The ease between them total and habitual, the ease of 2 people who have been each other's constant and steady company through something large and unkind. Carter helped clear the table. He washed dishes while Agnes dried, and they spoke quietly about the caseworker's visit and what paperwork Agnes needed to have ready. He left at 8:30, when the children were already upstairs. He drove home and put Molly to bed and went back downstairs. He did not sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with the motion sensor app open on his phone, the screen dark to save battery but close at hand. He thought about Marsh's calculation at the gate, the assessment he'd done of Carter, the recalibration, the decision to try the bolt cutters anyway. A man who decides to try something despite uncertainty is a man who has been given strong incentive by whoever is directing him. Strong enough to override ordinary caution. At 11:47 the phone lit up. Motion on the path. He was already pulling on his boots before the notification finished loading. He drove without headlights for the last quarter-mile, parking at the fence line the way he had that morning, the same gap in the fence where the post had shifted. He came across the field in the dark, moving through the corn rows, using the stalks as cover, watching the barn sensor light as it activated bright, sudden, flooding the gate area in white. It had done exactly what it was supposed to do. It had announced itself, which had been the point. Not to conceal the trap, but to make the intruders know they had been seen, which was sometimes a better deterrent than darkness. Owen Marsh was standing at the gate. He was not alone this time. There was another man Carter did not recognize, younger, leaner, dark jacket, standing a few feet back with his weight on his back foot, in the particular stance of someone who is there as backup and not entirely comfortable in the role. The younger man had seen the motion light and was scanning the barn, the outbuildings, the farmhouse windows. He hadn't yet looked toward the field. Marsh had his hand on the new lock. He had bolt cutters. He was working the jaw against the shackle with the focused patience of someone who had done this before and expected it to take a specific amount of time. Carter stepped out of the corn row and into the white light of the barn sensor. "Walk away," he said, not loud, carrying, the kind of voice that reaches exactly as far as it needs to. Both men turned. It happened almost simultaneously, the snap of attention that comes when a voice appears somewhere unexpected. Marsh's hand dropped from the bolt cutters but didn't release them. The younger man took a half step back. Marsh looked at Carter. He went through the same calculation he'd done at the cemetery, assessing, recalibrating. There was something different in his face this time. Not more confidence. Less. The particular look of a man who has come prepared for one kind of opposition and has found something else. "This is private property," Carter said. His voice was level and unhurried. "Both of you are trespassing. I've already called the police." He raised his phone so they could see the screen, the call log, the connected call, the timer counting up. "This conversation is being recorded." The younger man made a decision. He moved toward the county road, not running but moving with real intention, putting distance between himself and the gate at a pace that was just short of obvious panic. Marsh watched him go without calling after him, which told Carter something about the nature of their working relationship. Marsh stood alone with the bolt cutters. "These children have family," he said. His voice had the flatness of a script being run for the last time. He didn't believe it would work. He was saying it because saying nothing felt worse. "They have Agnes Calloway," Carter said, "and a family court that has been fully briefed on your prior visit, your vehicle, your history with Gerald Foster, and the trust provisions that make these children valuable to his estate." He paused. "I imagine whoever sent you would have preferred you didn't know I had that last piece. It changes the math for them considerably." Something moved across Marsh's face. Not fear exactly. Something slower than fear, and more complete. The look of a man who understands that the job he was sent to do has become, through no fault of his own execution, a liability for the person who sent him. It was an expression Carter had seen before in other places, in other circumstances, and it reliably preceded a decision to stop. Marsh set the bolt cutters against the gate post. He looked at Carter one more time. Then he walked toward the road. Blue and red lights appeared at the county road turn-in 40 seconds later. Deputy Hollins had been positioned within response distance, since Carter had called ahead that afternoon just in case, she'd said. Just as a precaution, the kind of precaution that looked like excessive caution until it wasn't. Marsh reached his car and found he had nowhere useful to go. Carter stood at the gate and watched the patrol cars deal with it. He watched until the road was quiet. Then he stood alone at the gate in the dark and breathed slowly and let the sustained attention of the last several hours release from his shoulders the way tension releases when it has nothing left to organize itself around. The motion sensor light clicked off after its timer ran down. The field went dark. Somewhere in the farmhouse, a light in an upstairs window remained on a warm, steady rectangle of yellow, and then after a while that too went out. He walked back to his truck through the corn rows the way he'd come. The night was very quiet. No wind. The corn stood still. Above the fields, the sky was fully clear and very deep and full of more stars than were visible from any city he'd ever worked in. He stopped once, partway across the field, and stood still and looked up at it. He had not looked at the sky that way in a long time. He drove home. He walked back through the corn rows the way he'd come, and found his truck at the fence line, and drove home with the windows down and the cool air moving through the cab. The night was very quiet. He stopped once, partway across the field before he reached the truck, and stood still for a moment and looked up at the sky, which was clear and very deep and full of more stars than he'd seen in years. He stood there and breathed. Then he kept walking. He made coffee he didn't drink. He sat at the kitchen table until nearly 5 in the morning, when the light through the window began its first pale change. Then he went upstairs and lay down on top of the covers and slept until Molly's alarm went off down the hall, and he got up and made her breakfast. And the morning was ordinary in every particular, which was the only thing he'd wanted it to be. The investigation took 3 weeks to resolve in the formal sense. Owen Marsh was charged with attempted custodial interference and criminal trespass. The second man, his name was Dale Pruitt, 26 years old, with no prior record and very little apparent understanding of what he'd been hired for, cooperated with the prosecutor's office and confirmed that Marsh had been paid by a third party to secure the children and transport them to a specific address. That address was traced to a woman named Sandra Voss, 60 years old, the sister of Gerald Foster, who had been managing Gerald's legal affairs and financial interests from her home 3 counties east. The family court moved quickly once it had something concrete to move on. Sandra Voss was removed as a recognized interested party in the estate proceedings. Gerald Foster's attorneys filed a motion that was denied. The trust remained intact. The children's legal placement with Agnes Calloway was formalized through the court, giving her temporary guardianship while a longer-term arrangement was evaluated. Carter Briggs heard about most of this from Agnes, who called him on a Thursday evening with the particular tone of someone delivering news they have been looking forward to delivering. He said that was good. She said it was, yes. He asked if the children were settled. She said they were eating better, which was her metric for everything. He said that was good again, and meant it. He saw them on a Saturday in late May. When Agnes asked him to come by to help hang a gate, the old iron gate needed to be replaced with something that actually closed and latched properly, and the neighbor she usually called for that kind of work was down with a bad back. Carter came with the right tools and a new gate hardware set from the farm supply store in town, and Lily and Noah sat on the fence rail and watched him work and offered advice he didn't take but listened to politely. "You put the hinge on the wrong side," Lily said. "I put it on the side that matches the post. The post is wrong." He looked at the post. She was, in fact, correct. The post had been set decades ago for a gate that swung the opposite direction. He adjusted. "Thank you," he said. She accepted this with the gravity of a person who is used to being right. Noah hadn't said much all morning. He'd been watching Carter work with the steady, focused attention he applied to things he was interested in. When the gate was hung and swung open and latched properly for the first time in what appeared to be many years, Noah got down from the fence rail and pushed it open and let it close and listened to the latch click. He did this 3 times. "Good," he said finally. Carter packed up his tools. He was walking back to his truck along the fence line, the same fence line where he'd been working that first morning when he heard footsteps in the grass behind him. He turned. Both children were following him, about 10 feet back, with the particular tentative energy of children who want to ask something and haven't decided if they're allowed to yet. He stopped walking. "What?" he said. They looked at each other. Lily looked away. Noah looked at the ground. Then Noah looked up. "Are you going to stay here?" he asked. "Like, around here? Near?" Carter looked at his farmhouse, visible through the tree line. The white clapboard, the wide porch, the kitchen window where the curtain had been there when he moved in and he'd never replaced it. The garden beds he'd started in the back corner that Molly had declared were her jurisdiction. He thought about the word stay. He had not thought of himself as staying when he'd arrived. He'd thought of himself as stopping, which was different. Stopping was temporary. Staying implied something about intention that he hadn't been ready to claim. He looked at Noah, who was watching him with the patient, undemanding seriousness of a child who has learned to wait for things and is not surprised when they take time. "Yeah," Carter said. "I'm staying." Noah nodded. They walked back through the grass toward the farmhouse, and Carter watched them go. Lily talking again, already explaining something with her hands, Noah walking beside her with his shoulder close to hers. The morning was warm and clear, and the corn in the fields was already past knee-height, and the gate that had never properly latched now latched perfectly behind them. Carter put his tools in the truck bed. He stood for a moment with his hands on the rail. Then he drove home to make lunch for his daughter, who would be back from her friend's house at noon, and who would want to tell him everything she'd missed, and whose voice, when she started talking about nothing important, was still the most ordinary and complete sound he knew how to hold on to. He drove home. He stayed.